Yes, yes, I understand. Perfect. Yeah, yeah, there is. Yes. Great. I've got good conversations here. Stakeholders. Wonderful.
Recharge Pakistan, which is one of the flagship projects of Pakistan. It aims at building Pakistan's resilience to climate change through ecosystem-based adaptation and green infrastructure for managing flood risk in the country. As you all know, that
Remember the mangrove forest when I was a kid? There was a system.
Hello, hello.
morning, everyone. Hello. 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 Yeah, good morning, everyone, and we're sorry for the late start. We're having some issues, and we're trying to resolve that. The Minister of Zambia, who's supposed to be part of this panel, will be joining us shortly. So while waiting, I think we'll have to start because we have our Honorable Minister here and a colleague from the Adaptation Hub, the Adaptation Fund. Excuse me if I use the word hub because we have the African Adaptation Hub that which also do some work around adaptation and is supported by WWF Finland. So I want to start while waiting. So the panel today, this is a high-level panel, and I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Dure Allison. I'm Policy and Partnership Manager for WWF African Regional Office, and also manage our relationship with the African Development Bank. Actually, I'm based at the African Development Bank in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. So as we all know, we're coming 2 days to the end of this COP27, labeled the African Cup. And we all know that in the last number of years, and as of recent, we've seen the worsening crisis of climate change that has impacted communities and people, especially in the global south and in Africa, particularly where I live. We've seen from Pakistan to Nigeria, where we've lost, and all these crises have led to serious human casualties. One of the things we'll be looking today in this panel is how do we unlock the potential of nature-based solutions unlock the potential of nature-based solutions to finance climate adaptation. And I think for many years we've been talking about climate mitigation, and as much as we appreciate the work that has been done on climate mitigation, we think adaptation is one of those areas of work in the climate crisis that could help drive positive change. And we think that nature holds that potential. So if we look at what has been happening in that space on climate adaptation and climate finance in the last couple of years, we see that the amount of climate finance that has been flowing into adaptation has been, according to the IPCC report, the recent IPCC report is 4 to 8% of all climate finance that has been directed to climate adaptation. And Africa has received only 3% of all climate finance, that is adaptation and mitigation combined. Africa, which has been considered as one of the continents most vulnerable to climate crisis, has received only 3% of climate financing. And if we look at the current investments in nature-based solutions, over the years have amounted only to 113 billion USD, and according to UNEP, this amount needs to be tripled by 2030 and needs to be increased by fourfold by 2050. So, and of all this amount of money that we see flowing, only 1% of this has been directed to nature-based solutions, and not even talking about nature-based solutions for adaptation. So that is some of the conversation we would like to have here today with our panelists. So I would like now to introduce to you our panelists, and like I said, I apologize because one of them is still to come. But I will start with Honorable Minister Mari Ohisalo, the Minister of Finland for Climate and Green Economy, if I get it right. No, Climate and Environment, sorry, I get it mixed up. And our friend from the Adaptation Fund, Mr. Minko Olikane, I get it right. And the Adaptation Fund, as we all know, is one of those funds that has been put together to try to help countries vulnerable to climate crisis. And our third panelist, who will be joining us shortly, is the Honorable Minister from Zambia, Honorable Engineer Collins Zofo, who is also the chair of the African Group of Negotiators. However, before we I would like to say the panel today, or this conversation today, we would like to start by showing two short videos on some work we have been doing as WWF on adaptation. And the first one is from WWF Kenya, and it's good to reiterate or re-emphasize that WWF Finland and WWF Denmark have been supporting some work on climate adaptation in Eastern Africa. And also we have a second video from WWF Pakistan, and as we all know, Pakistan recently has been a victim of climate crisis with floods I've never seen. I mean, I was shocked when I saw some of those floods on video. So we'll look at those two videos and then we'll come back to the panel. So I'll let the technical team do that. Thanks.
Hello distinguished delegates. Today I'm going to present Recharge Pakistan, which is one of the flagship projects of Pakistan. It aims at building Pakistan's resilience to climate change through ecosystem-based adaptation and green infrastructure for managing flood risk in the country. As you all know, that Pakistan is the sixth most populous country in the world and is prone to recurring large-scale floods, droughts and landslides. Increasingly severe and frequent floods and droughts caused by climate change are already impacting Pakistan's population, key ecosystems and economy. This has particularly severe consequences for the country as it is dependent on water to support its predominantly agriculture-based economy. During the destructive to intense floods, it was the first time when the need was felt in the country to manage flood risk, store extra flood water and harness hail torrents. And that makes the basis for this Recharge Pakistan project in the country. If you look at the recent floods of 2022, which further played havoc in the country, 33 million people got affected with 1,500 deaths. One-third of the country was under flood and millions of homes were destroyed, as well as the livestock in addition to some infrastructure losses. A conservative estimate suggests a loss of $30 billion in the form of damages. In order to address this issue, WWF Pakistan, in close coordination with the government of Pakistan, started developing Recharge Pakistan project to secure funding from Green Climate Fund. This project has a 30-year vision and will be executed in 3 different phases till 2050. So by the end of the first phase, which is we say that by 2030, we are looking to create an impact where flood risks are reduced and water recharge is enhanced at 6 sites within the Indus Basin, and also building resilience of 10 million people and vulnerable ecosystems. During the development phase of Recharge Pakistan, the project team started with 11 potential sites across Pakistan, and after pre-feasibility studies, 6 potential sites were finalized and detailed feasibility studies were carried out at these sites and a range of interventions were identified. These interventions were discussed with relevant government institutions at the national and subnational level, along with the local communities to ensure ownership and long-term sustainability of EBA and green infrastructure interventions. EBA interventions include the restoration of degraded watersheds, restoring natural flow pathways, desilting and restoring channels, whereas green infrastructure interventions including recharge basins and retention areas will be implemented at strategic locations across these sites. These interventions will provide the evidence base to inform regulatory change in Pakistan's water sector towards ecosystem-based approach for flood and water resource management. So thank you very much for your time, and we all hope within Pakistan that this project will be an exemplary initiative that will contribute in minimizing the severe impacts of climate change which Pakistan is facing currently. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that video, and I think we'll just change
I
that.
remember the mangrove forest when I was a kid. There was a system of protecting the mangroves by our fathers and grandfathers with a little distraction. My name is Ali Salim Shufa. I have lived here for the last 55 years. This area is called Igazi. It is found in the south coast of Kenya. Most of the people are fishermen. Long time ago they used to go for fishing and they came with fish. A lot of fish. When I was a kid I used to go here and fish. But now there is no fish around here. Things changed in our area. There are a lot of people who came from other areas because of the increase in population. This led to a lot of demand for firewood, a lot of demand for building material. The consequences of cutting down the mangroves led to the diminishing stocks of fish.
All the benefits that these mangrove areas would have brought to humanity, to the community, to the environment, they are lost. My name is Mohamed Pakia. I work for WWF Kenya, the Coastal Kenya program. The mangrove forests are important in well-being of the local community through provision of livelihoods, and also it is important because of its environmental services, protection against storms, protection against siltation and sea erosion. It is one of the important climate change mitigation due to its ability to do carbon sequestration, be able to capture carbon 4 times better than the terrestrial counterpart.
Without mangroves in a village like this, there is no life in the village because the economy of this village depends entirely on the sea. It depends entirely on fishing, and fishing depends on the mangroves. Fish depend on the mangroves for breeding and for survival.
Kenya, in collaboration with other WWF networks, are working towards conservation of this mangrove ecosystem by ensuring that the communities are capacity built and they are empowered to understand the importance of these mangroves, as well as to participate in the restoration and conservation of these mangroves. And this we have done through community groups such as Forest Association, as well as beach management units.
The community are brought together and we plant mangroves every year. The community is involved in the planting of the mangroves, so the forest is growing. There is a good future, and also through that the fish catch is also increasing. Now every parent was being told that this year you are not going to buy books because the books have already been bought by the proceeds from the conservation of mangrove forests. So this was a big incentive to the village, and everybody now felt like owning or protecting the mangroves from destruction because they saw the importance. So that was a blessing to us.
I think that was great. Thanks so much for watching those 2 videos. And I think, like you say, from those 2 videos, we all realize that nature-based solutions are key in stopping or in curbing the climate crisis. And at this point, I would like to introduce to you our third speaker who just came in. He's Mr. Victor Chiba. He's Deputy Director for the Ministry of Climate and Green Economy from the Republic of Zambia. He will be representing the Minister who is unfortunately held up in other engagements, but he might join us before we run to the end, because I think it will be good to get his own perspective as chair of the AGN. I want to take him here in this panel, not as the Minister of Zambia, but as the chair of the African Group of Negotiators for Climate Negotiations. So, without further ado, we've seen these two videos. We've seen the potential of MBS, and I want to say that we've been doing the same work in Uganda. We will not want to show, we don't want to turn this into a film show, so we don't want to show the third video from Uganda. But I want you to understand that from what you've seen, that MBS for adaptation holds immense potential to help solve the climate crisis. And in Uganda, we've been trying to address several societal challenges, such as food security, climate change, and socioeconomic development by applying agroforestry, whereby we use high-value indigenous tree species that are planted among crops and animals. They provide shade, they bind the soil, and they increase resistance to pests, droughts, and floods. We have also worked in Uganda to restore some of the degraded catchment areas and riverbanks to address intertwined challenges of climate change and socioeconomic development. So I think with that, I will now turn to the Honorable Minister, and to all of you three, but I'll start with you, Honorable Minister. From your perspective, what are the challenges and bottlenecks you have identified in funding nature-based solutions for adaptation projects? And you might use this opportunity to already start telling us what measures should be taken to improve the situation. What are the global strategic priorities going forward? And I want to say that all the speakers will have 3 minutes to elaborate. It's not every time you have a chance to tell the minister you have 3 minutes, right? So I would like to get your take on that, Minister.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this really important panel discussion. I don't think it is rocket science that nature-based solutions are the ones that will save us. We have just sort of forgot them. We have the triple crisis on our hands: climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and pollution, and we should be able to tackle all of them. Well, now we're here to hopefully get out of this COP with something that is more than what happened in the Glasgow COP26. And I hope that we will also be talking in the last papers we will get out from this COP, that they would also refer to these nature-based solutions. I actually, before this ministerial post, worked as a Minister of the Interior of my country, and the rescue services area also is really interested and keen on the adaptation work. Because you see already, even in the northern parts of the world, you see the effects of climate change. And we know that the nature-based solutions are the cheapest ones compared to many others, and compared to the losses and damages that climate change is already doing. And what we just recognized back home in Finland is that actually our national climate panel made a report on adaptation, and they found out that there are many projects done, but they're mainly voluntary. They are mainly private actors doing those. So what I think from the political side is that we need more coherent policies. We need actions from the political level. NGOs are doing important, really amazingly important work, but we need first of all, the coherence in politics. And one thing that we have just done in Finland is that we have presented the Parliament a new Nature Protection Act. And on that act, we actually have the compensation work that in the future, that compensation work would be voluntary. I would have said that not just voluntary, but this is the version of the law right now. But this is something that, okay, if you're harming environment, you should also be compensating that work. So on the legal side, but then also on the monetary flow side, I think all the climate financing should be nature positive. So, and all the money we're using, in this COP we're discussing a lot about whether we have money, whether we have enough money as a humankind. And we do have money, we're just aiming the money not towards the right places. So we should aim our monies to the places that are not harmful for environment, for climate, for people. And the least we can do is, for example, introduce the do no significant harm principle in many actions we're doing. And in the European Union level, this do no significant harms discussion is getting bigger and bigger. But we also have to get from that towards the nature positive side. So we need many actions. We're not there yet, but we have good projects, and we just actually organized, my colleague organized a good event last spring, bringing together financiers, ministers, people discussing on the good experiences we have. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Minister Mario Esalo. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that we don't need to make nature-based solutions voluntary. We need to move it into the political space. We need to make it binding, and that is, I think, from what I'm hearing, that's the way we need to take this forward, especially if we need to ensure that climate we bring real changes in the climate crisis. I'll now turn to our friend who's representing the minister, the director from Zambia. I know, I'm sorry we're taking you on this, but being in the ministry and working with the minister closely, I believe that you could also provide some perspective or some response to this question. And it's the same question that was asked to the minister. From your perspective, what are the challenges and bottlenecks you have identified in funding MBS for adaptation, or in your case as a country in implementing MBS for adaptation projects, be it in Zambia or in any other country? You know, you may also try to look on measures that we can take to improve the situation. And what do you think could be, especially from this COP, our global strategic priorities to move this whole conversation forward?
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I wish to tender the apologies of the Honorable Minister. You know, we are the chair for the African group, so he's extremely busy in all these other issues, but he's going to join us. Representing the Honorable Minister, from the chair point of view, we have been ensuring that as we discuss on the African group, that we make sure that nature-based solutions are a priority. Now, as we do that, we have noticed that there are a number of opportunities that are coming from also other African states in the quest of how we could do it better. I think some of the issues that have been coming up in the previous negotiations and discussions are issues to do with time, the long-term nature of some of these funded projects, and also the customs and cultures that are existing in most of these communities who are expected to be helped with the issues of vulnerability and adaptation-related aspects. On a longer term, coming to Zambia, of course, I'm mixing Zambia with other countries and what we are doing. There's a real opportunity that comes in terms of nature-based solutions, in ecosystem services and what the livelihood communities need on the ground. The political will is there, and from the country point of view in Zambia, we have seen a very huge political will coming from the presidency, who has been talking about some of these issues and also implementing them. The Honorable Minister has ensured that while working with the civil society, we try to ensure that most of the players are brought on board in terms of the interministerial issues and also livelihood community interventions that have been taken on board. We have even come up with reforms to ensure that as we get into nature-based solution, this concept is understood by many players. Now, there is another aspect of funding that comes from these related interventions. We have noted over time that we have had short-term funding coming from different partners. On a longer term, we would want to look at a real long-term intervention that helps to address nature-based solutions. Issues of tree planting, plantation establishment. We have noted as a bottleneck that most of the organizations that have been trying to apply for probably bonds or loans to get into nature-based solutions, they are not usually given these long-term loans. So we are now promoting and encouraging as a priority that as we look at these funding opportunities such as green bonds and any other green financing that comes in there to deal with the nature-based solution, we need to look at a period of more than 30 years. And we will see now a heavy investment in the sector. We are also indicating that out of what has happened in the past decades and what is working and what is not working, is it beyond what has been funded? How can we ensure that the political will, which the Honorable Minister here did indicate, that it becomes a priority in Africa? How do we win the battle? In this COP27, we are talking about the issues of carbon trade and also the issue of Article 6, which have been discussed even by the African group. But we are already seeing a real opportunity moving forward, that the fact that we are talking of carbon credits coming from all these initiatives such as forest management and also biodiversity management in order to reduce on the loss that has happened. We are seeing an emergent in the coming future as Africa. We are seeing an emergent of a new form of business that will help nature-based solutions, such as issues such as water credit, because we cannot talk about carbon-related credits before we realize that we have an innovation which we can put in as Africa. Even issues of biodiversity credit, these three resources that we are taking care of in the different landscapes of Africa, we could already see an opportunity on how this can benefit the communities. Today is an innovation we are talking, everyone is talking about carbon credit. What else can we look at as we try to promote the nature-based solutions? So as we deal with all these issues, we are trying to ensure that the political will comes in first. From the Zambia point of it, we are updating the Honorable Minister, we are updating the Presidency in ensuring that these issues are taken on board very, very seriously. And most of the sessions, they are part and parcel of what we do. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deputy Director, for such wonderful insight on what is happening. And I think I like when you brought out the idea of communities, the use of communities, the fact that nature-based solutions should be based on customs. And yesterday I participated in the panel where we're launching a report, WWF of the African Development Bank, on water waste to resilience, looking at how do you apply MBS in securing water sources. And one of the questions a participant did ask was, what is new in nature-based solutions? We've been doing it all the years. What is new? And I think what I'm hearing from you is that I think what is new is how we've reframed and we repackage that to make it bankable, to bring in investments into it. And I think that is what I'm hearing from you. And so thanks so much for such brilliant insights. I will now turn to you, the head of Adaptation Fund, Mr. Miko Olakena. And I'll ask you the same question I've asked both the Honorable Minister and the gentleman, the Deputy Director of Forestry from Zambia. From your perspective, what are the challenges and bottlenecks you have identified, especially as Adaptation Fund, in funding MBS for adaptation projects? And also, what measures do you see that we can put in place to improve the situation, and what are the global strategic priorities going forward, especially from your perspective as head of an adaptation fund? Thanks.
Thank you, Dorel, and it's really great to be here. Thank you, WWF, for the kind invitation. Just a few words about the Adaptation Fund. It's a climate fund that serves the Paris Agreement and finances concrete country-driven projects that help the most vulnerable communities in developing countries adapt and build resilience to the effects of climate change. And many of these projects that we fund are replicable and scalable. Our strategic focus on people, livelihoods and ecosystems is well aligned with the nature-based solution approach and the UNEA agreed definition on nature-based solution. The Adaptation Fund is a country-driven fund, and we fund projects that are based on the country's priorities, such as outlined in their nationally determined contributions and in their national adaptation plans. Although it would be possible for us to fund adaptation for ecosystems' own sake, so essentially to fund the conservation of biodiversity, practically all of the Adaptation Fund projects that employ a nature-based solution approach enhance human resilience to climate change through the conservation of ecosystems and nature services. Out of our 140 projects so far, 23 focus primarily on nature-based solutions. However, the majority of all of our projects have a component or two that are related to nature-based solutions and that complement the other activities that we are funding. We fund projects at subnational, national, and transboundary level, and the projects that we fund are actually quite similar to the ones that we saw here in the video related to mountain catchment forests, mangroves, and other such areas. In terms of challenges of funding NBS projects, the main challenge really is the availability of funding. This is a shared challenge between the financing gap for nature, which is currently at $4.1 trillion by 2050, according to UNEP, and the financing gap for adaptation, which is currently estimated to be between $160 and $340 billion per year until 2030. The Adaptation Fund funds the most vulnerable communities in developing countries, and our funding is grant-based, which suits well the needs of those most vulnerable communities that really don't have access to private finance or loans. And although there are increasing number of financing models and green bonds were mentioned here, for example, in the big picture, majority of the investment may be such that it doesn't yield short-term financial revenue, so there is need for grant-based funding. There's also a lack of data and a lack of capacity. Our approach to solving these challenges is learning by doing. The Adaptation Fund investments are relatively small, up to $10 million each, but they often offer starting points for scaling up. During project implementation, they offer opportunities to build capacity at different levels, and many of our projects have been scaled up. And also, although we don't fund research as such as individual activities, many of the projects contain analytical components that also help build the knowledge base that is so much needed in the area of nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thanks so much for those brilliant reflections. And yeah, you're right that adaptation and what you provide, and that's why I was talking about the bankability of nature-based solutions. I think that is where we need to go. And like you said, that your funds provide a foundation on which we can build other projects and then make it scalable. And I think I like that point. And also, you also raised the issue of grant-based. And I think we all agree, and I think as an African, we think that climate funding should not be loans. And I think that is something we've put, they should be based on grants, and I think that's the only way we can really achieve real success in fighting the climate crisis. So thank you all three for those wonderful insights. I will now turn to specific questions, and I'll start with you again, Honorable Minister Maria Osalo. We know that in 2020, Finland, the government of Finland, convened members of the Champions Group in a high-level conference, and I would like to know to what extent MBS, and especially MBS for adaptation, featured in your discussion with the champions, and also what Finland is doing as a member of the champion group on adaptation funding to improve or accelerate funding for MBS for adaptation. And I would like to say that your government, through WWF Finland, is actually supporting the adaptation work in Africa, and we really appreciate that. So I'll turn to you. What are we doing like champions?
Thank you very much. Sometimes, not always, in politics you can be proud of the things you've done, and you can always say that you should do more, but I think even the steps taken forward are always plus. So during this governmental period, we have not just been financing or not just doing our climate action back home, getting our new climate act that says that Finland will become climate neutral by 2035 and right after climate negative, but also we've nearly doubled the climate financing we've been having, and this is a quite big thing as even in this COP, financing is one of the biggest questions, and can we keep the 1.5 alive, and financing, and loss and damage, and so on. So we have been financing, as I said, nearly doubled, and actually almost half of this money was directed to adaptation activities. And our most recent financial contributions have been to Adaptation Fund and the Least Developed Countries Fund. And I think having the focus on especially the most vulnerable, the least developed, I think this is where we should aim also in this COP in general. And I think this is one of the key messages from the European Union side also, as I will be negotiating on the cover decision later on. I think this will be one of the most important things we will have there. But both of these financing routes have actually numerous projects going on regarding restoration, protection, and sustainable managing ecosystem services. And in general, I think we should be also marketing ecosystem services better and more. That wording is probably a bit hard to understand for many people still, and but while we would go back to very concrete things. Even in our Nordic cities, we have already warmer summers, and if we plant more trees to get shade from the sun, that is a small concrete example what a nature-based solution can be. And as I mentioned, often they can also be the most cheapest if we do them in good time.
So thanks so much, Honorable Minister, for such a response. And yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the idea of ecosystem services, because in this COP, and I'll get to you, my brother, the whole idea of MBS and EBS, right? And I know one of the contentious issues for Africa, which is not only in the UNFCCC but also in the CBD, is how do we take on MBS? And so for you, as representing the chair of the AGN, and like I said before, adaptation has been what Africa has put on the table since Paris. We've had it in all the COPs. And we've seen in the continent over the last years a growing number of initiatives around adaptation. So we have the African Adaptation Initiative. After COP22, we had the African Agricultural Adaptation Program. We now have the African Adaptation Acceleration Program hosted by the African Development Bank, and with support from GCA, the Global Center for Adaptation. They have recently opened the Global Center for Adaptation Regional Office for Africa, launched or hosted by the African Development Bank. So as chair of the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Negotiations, what do you see going forward to be specific needs and priorities for MBS for adaptation funding from the perspective of the Global South generally? Because, and I think the Honorable Minister did say, today we can't just talk about the climate crisis in isolation. Africa is definitely a vulnerable community, but we've seen what has happened across the world with floods, with hurricanes that we have not seen before. So what will you think could be the needs and priorities for MBS for adaptation, and what are the priorities or perspective for the Global South and for Africa in particular?
Thank you very much. Clearly, the priority number one is the issue of financing, which is still under heavy discussion. It's very clear that issues of adaptation have been a challenge in the Global South, especially for Africa, and we would want to see more of such arrangements agreed upon. Of course, we agree that there has been an effort in many countries where some funds have reached, but we would want to see more of that, because adaptation funds for these national budgets are quite some colossal amounts of resources that are needed. Of course, historically, the issue of climate financing and climate adaptation, like you have said, moderator, is not supposed to be a loan, as per se. You don't get a loan to be helped to adapt. As much as possible, from the Africa chair point of view, on behalf of the chair, our focus and our vision is to ensure that as much as possible, we continue to get these grants so that we are helped to adopt with what has happened within the climate space. I know also from the countries that are planning or that are helping in these issues, they are also indicating that the other responsibility of ensuring that we are helped to adopt is to take a keen interest in certain other aspects, such as sustainable management of these resources. I think from the African point of view, it's very clear that each time we come to the COPs, this has been a thorny issue. And we hope we can move into the financing mechanism. Of course, we appreciate what has happened, but we believe a lot more needs to happen, and we are appealing to the other countries. I know that on the other parallel sessions, they're still negotiating on how this should be done, discussions around loss and damage and all the other related adaptation discussions to help us move on as Africa in order for us to be helped to do whatever we can do. Now, as we do that, the other perspective which we need to consider is that we all need to agree that nature-based solutions are a natural way in which we can manage the environment and also have communities live in a sustainable manner. We just have to agree. I know some of the financials have been indicating that the long-term implications of some of these interventions are one of such reasons why they're talking of risk issues and de-risking of their funds and so on. We need to agree on a model so that we are able to do this in a win-win situation. And again, I know within the same context, we can have other partners who have come in from the context of looking at it from the point of business and also from the point of an adaptation. So what we are saying, in as much as others want to look at it from the business perspective, we do not need loans as Africa, speaking from the African chair. As much as possible, let's negotiate deals, let's negotiate models that are going to give grants to help us adapt to the situation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. And I will now turn to Mr. Miko, and I want to apologize on his behalf because he has to leave us immediately after this. And so I'll be straightforward with you. We saw the Standing Committee on Finance release their finance on the issue of finance for nature-based solutions. The two conferences they've organized, 2021 and 2022. What is the most important takeaway from all these processes as we move? And what kind of commitments should be made at this COP to increase funding for MBS?
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Minister for Finland's support to the Adaptation Fund that you mentioned. We very much appreciate that. But coming to the question posed by you, Darrell, indeed, the Standing Committee on Finance has held two forums on the topic of nature-based solutions over the last 1.5 years. We as the Adaptation Fund have contributed to that process based on our experience of funding ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions for the last 10 plus years. Some of the outcomes from the process, which is not a negotiating process, it's a technical process to advise the negotiation process, includes the recognition that there's a huge finance gap. In the UNFCCC process, nationally determined contributions are increasingly referring to nature-based solutions to meet the climate ambition. So there's a need to further understand the costing of these activities that are outlined in the national determined contributions. Especially on the international sources of finance, the second forum noted the access to finance is hindered by processes that are perceived to be complex. The forum also observed it was still difficult to integrate the value of ecosystem goods and services into the economic and financial services and developing business case for investing in nature and ecosystems. So there's a lack of capacity that would need to be filled. Nature-based solutions often take time compared to other types of projects. It takes more time to grow a mangrove forest compared to building a seawall. it takes even more time to grow a coral reef. So that is another challenge with these approaches. But regardless, like the minister mentioned, they are often more cost-effective than the infrastructure-based measures and yield other benefits. In many countries, land titles and water rights, water use rights may be unclear and undocumented with local communities and indigenous populations, which makes it difficult to identify collateral for investments for finance. The forum suggested some ways in which the investment gap could be overcome. Governments could give clear policy signals, such as integrating nature-based solutions in national development strategies and other documents. Governments could also promote the use of financial instruments such as nature or climate bonds or blended finance in meeting the finance needs. In terms of enhancing access, the process has suggested moving, again, like has been mentioned, from short-term to long-term and sustained capacity building models, improving the coordination of capacity building between different line ministries, using readiness programs of climate funds to strengthen the country ownership and institutional capacity, and finally strengthening South-South cooperation to facilitate the sharing of good practices and lessons learned relating to nature-based solutions. At the Adaptation Fund, we were actually quite pleased with these recommendations since our approach is aimed at that longer-term capacity. We operate a readiness program that serves all developing countries that is well suited for building country ownership. And in fact, we also use South-South cooperation for sharing good practices directly between different developing countries and lessons learned that can help shorten the learning curve in these respects. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Mr. Miko, and we really appreciate you honoring our invitation. We appreciate all the work you've been doing, and we believe that we'll have an opportunity again to have this conversation continue. And while you excuse yourself, I know it's the last days and things are running at us. I wish you all the best and safe flight as you leave. Thanks. So can we appreciate Mr. Miko as he leaves us? So thanks, and then I'll turn now. We don't have much time, but I would like to use the last remaining minutes we have. And apologies again for you and for the late start, but we'll try to catch up. So my last question to you, in terms of wrapping up your reflections, is what kind of commitments should be made at this COP in order to increase funding for MBS for adaptation? Honorable Minister.
Thank you. It is now already Thursday, and we have very many tracks on negotiations, still very open and very wide. And I think we have a lot of work to do during the next couple of days in order to finish this COP so that we will leave here. We will keep the Paris Agreement 1.5 alive. This is more important than nothing ever before. And also, as we leave from here, I think hopefully nature-based solutions in the future will also be more easier accessible, that the accessibility to them would be easier, and we would really have more direct access to these financing flows regarding nature-based solutions. And as I mentioned before, I think all the climate financing should be nature positive. And if we could bring in the last covered decisions and on all the text that we're going to give out from this COP, the idea that we will not tackle climate crisis if we will not tackle biodiversity crisis together, and here the nature-based solutions are the most important. And at the same time, I think participation of local communities, participation of these people that are already facing the biggest losses and damages, the most vulnerable people, often women, children, indigenous people, and in general human rights aspects should be here all the time very strongly. so that the local communities and people could also be participating into these processes, and they are also in many ways empowering. I think that these projects can always have the social and ecological and economical side in them.
Thanks so much, Minister, for the response. And to you, Deputy Director, same question. What do we see coming out of COP? On Friday at, I don't know what time, midnight or Saturday early morning, sometimes it goes right into the morning. What do you see when the curtain draws that we get out of here as a legacy for MBS for adaptation?
We are expecting nothing but the best. And as the Honorable Minister has indicated, we would want to see the best outcome that is going to benefit the communities and also that is going to help us prioritize issues of adaptation. I think the solution lies in that. In Africa, we are second after the Amazon. We have the largest biodiversity, which accounts for more than 10%. And we are hoping for the best, and let's see how it goes. Thank you.
And we appreciate our panelists here, the Honorable Minister, the Deputy Director. Before we open up to you, I think they did wonderful. The insights, the reflections were great, and I really do appreciate. I will turn to you, the audience. We've all heard, and MBS is a one thing in this COP, adaptation for Africans. But before I open the question to all of you, I want to pick someone from the audience because of the work we've been doing in their country. Mr. Simon Peter, please, can you frame your question? And we should do that in 2 minutes. And tell if it's a question or a comment to whom that is addressed.
Thank you, moderator. I initially had most of my question to the Adaptation Fund, but in his absence, I think I will still ask the Honorable Minister and my colleague from Africa. Now, Honorable Minister, looking at what has been discussed here, there is a lot of nature-based solutions in Africa. And you, in the global south, let me say, and in the north, you also have comparative advantages in different ways. So what, in your view, do you think is the partnership that we need between the north and south to deliver on nature-based solutions and the ecosystem's sustainability? Then to my brother from Africa, Africa is known to be home to indigenous knowledge in conservation, and I think it came out from your speech. So before, in addition to what our partners from the north bring to support us with, what can we do locally as Africa to sustain conservation initiatives? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon. I think we'll take that question, and then we'll see if we have one more question from the audience.
Okay, thank you very much. Really important question, and as I mentioned here, I think at least in the cover decision, when we leave from here, should be stated the rights of the indigenous people, and human rights aspects should be strong here. So I think the question of indigenous people is in many places in the world. Many communities are suffering from climate change already, even in the northern parts of the world. Actually, Sami people in northern Europe are actually facing already climate change. In many ways, they have problems to have their culture, have their work, have their traditional ways of living because of climate change in many ways. So I think there is a lot that we can engage between northern and southern parts of the world, best practices, and obviously what from the developed countries perspective, I think we should acknowledge the risk of the most vulnerable countries all the time in every discussions here. And I want to, because I've been hearing this message also in the corridors of these meetings that, for example, the European Union wouldn't be here to support these countries. I want to say this is not true. I want to say European Union wants to be a champion in supporting the most vulnerable people around the world. And I want to leave here so that we will be saying this together, that nature-based solutions are a part of our solution for tackling climate crisis together.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add on to what the Honorable Minister has indicated, indigenous knowledge, yes, exists in Africa, and the impact of climate change has not spared the cultural practices that are happening there. The agriculture systems, the farming types, and all this has also led to some of these interventions. What can we do as we wait for support within the indigenous knowledge that we have? We will continue supporting sustainable practices, but as a result of the heavy impact that has happened, and that's a global issue, we would want to scale up that by ensuring that the vulnerable communities are helped in one way or another. I think this cuts across Africa, and as we do that, we will continue encouraging other countries to also deal with issues of innovation in ensuring that the culture practices are also in line with the sustainable solutions on climate. Thank you.
So much, and I think that was wonderful. I would like us to appreciate the reflections, the conversation we've had here today, and for you, Honorable Minister, and the Deputy Director representing the Minister. I know we took you unawares, but you did so well. It shows how much you mastered the issues. We really appreciate. And to our wonderful audience, both remotely and here in the room, it was great having you. And what we're getting from the conversation here today, in the kind of wrap up quickly, is that MBS should be brought into the political space and should not be made voluntary. We got it from Zambia, we got it from Finland. It needs to be right-based. I think the Adaptation Fund really made it, showed what the challenges we have if we don't take it from that perspective, right-based. And I think Honorable Minister Mario Ohisalo also mentioned that it needs to be right-based. We need to bring in the human rights perspective into it. It should be based on long-term funding, because MBS, they take time to really get on. And also, it should not be grants. Generally, climate financing should not be loans. It should be grant-based. And also, as we move from here, tomorrow evening, Saturday morning, Sundays, we all might be heading to Montreal. There's that nexus. We need to start bringing the climate conversation into the nature conversation, because the solutions to the climate crisis that we're having today lie in nature. So with that, I thank you very much for your wonderful attention, and I hope to wish all of you safe skies as you all travel back, and hope that this was really an African Cup. Thanks, everyone.